Hey everybody, Jason Sheftel here, and today we got to talk about the Olympics. They finally started. I did a little long running commentary in the lead up to it, and now we actually get to see the real show, which is really fun because it is going to be, as everyone can basically predict and expect, it's going to be equal parts heinous and impressive. So it actually is worth just trying to enjoy the actual spectacle of it a little bit. So let's see if we can just see a little bit here. Yep. So you got crazy, amazing, as always, like ceremony, right? You get crazy fireworks, light shows, synchronized dancing, basically every sort of thing that you can imagine that basically the Chinese Communist Party is really, really, really good at doing. And this kind of stuff, it's kind of like North Korea in a weird way, right? North Korea puts on these grand shows. And if you look at, say, Chinese military parades, they look eerily similar to Soviet military parades, to North Korean military parades. That is definitely a shared history there. But what's happened in the new millennium is basically that China has just gotten really slick, really, 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 really slick with all of this. And part of the reason I focus on Hollywood and entertainment and media and propaganda is because when you get really, really slick with your branding, your advertising, your marketing, you can really contort and change the way people see the world, basically. So it's super interesting, super powerful, and China is really, really good at it. So let's see what else they did. I don't know if anybody saw this, but this was a really cool synchronized uh, LED lit dance routine that basically kind of looked like a giant sort of flower or blooming plant. And there were all these people, or there's people in there, and they're like moving around. It looked really amazing. And so this is actually really cool. I'm going to try and spend a little time trying to show how this is, explain, kind of get into a little bit of the cool stuff about this before we get into all the heinous stuff that's going on, just because it's actually interesting. So the part of the reason China was really interested in the Winter Olympics is, well, obviously it's the Winter Olympics, it's credibility, it's world stage, all that kind of stuff. But as a little cool thing, it actually falls really close to the Chinese Lunar New Year. And the Chinese Lunar New Year is a really popular sort of Chinese holiday that is rooted in the long ancient Chinese farming calendar, the sort of lunisolar calendar that China's used for thousands of years to orient itself towards skies, heaven, earth, all that kind of stuff, and to basically make sure it could have enough food for the next year. That's like the material basis of it. The super spiritual stuff is, oh my God, it's the beginning of spring and the end of this and the end of that. And it's basically broken into 24 segments, and it's all very cool. People, we're very, very pulled away from agricultural life, the seasons, nature, all that sort of stuff. Part of the reason people are so into astrology and other things is, and other past ancient practices, is because it connects you back to, let's say, the reality around us, even if it is inflected with a lot of spiritual language, and that is perhaps really hard for people to actually grasp. Even though we try to and we want to, like the body sensations and all that, it is very difficult. But one cool thing about the Chinese Lunar New Year is that a good thing to know about is that it's not, as actually they said in the opening ceremony, which people should watch, right? It is a cool thing, and you get that blend of slick spectacle and heinous propagandized atrocity kind of at one in one. And this is something you're going to see a lot of going forward with China, so you might as well check it out. And the cool part of the spectacle and the deeper meaning kind of element to this is the Lunar New Year is very cool. It's basically, it's the start of spring, but it's sort of like the beginning of the hope for spring, right? So it happens typically ish around like early February, and it's sort of like deep within, the snow is still there, everything is still miserable. If you live in, say, New York or something in February, it's really miserable. And what you're celebrating in the Chinese Lunar New Year is basically the hope for spring, the beginning, the sort of inner early bud of spring, right? The beginning of some little green shoot that is not yet visible but on its way, right? So it's a very important, very cool holiday. It's very historically, it was important because miserable. Winter was miserable, and there needed to be hope for spring, right? You needed all the plants to grow. You needed everything to sort of work out. Otherwise, there were real problems down the line. So big spectacles like this are really actually cool, right? They're connected to the past, to the history, and this stuff is not. This isn't the sort of thing that's worth hating. You really like I personally you gotta enjoy some of the stuff that's going on in the world. Otherwise, just you'll just be totally overwhelmed by the bad stuff, really. And this is also a kind of cool thing. They did a really cool opening show, just so people know. Part of the reason this ceremony happened the way it did is that China didn't have to spend as much money as it did the other time. So back in 2008, China spent like $40 billion to try and make Beijing palatable to the world to make the Olympics work. And it did all sorts of things. It shut down coal plants. It tried to tried to get people to do more hygienic practices. It put English all over the city. It built this whole Olympic venue in this region in Beijing where all the ceremonies and the events and stuff are happening, which is really interesting. When I was there over a decade ago, this area was really, really barren, right? It was just like a new zone that was kind of supposed to build up into something. And now you can actually see in all the footage that there is a whole region around it, and Beijing is a massive city, so that actually happened. That's development that was going to work. It's not going to just be totally false. But this is a really cool image of basically what they did is they had this really cool LED light infrastructure that was sort of around. It was sort of like there was like large screens that kind of went down across the ground and up like a long strip. They had all these LED lights coming from below and above and smoke and all this stuff. And they were really cool stuff. And they had the Olympic rings like pop out of a ice block, which is pretty awesome. This is a little picture of that little ice block. Yeah, crazy. This is the old Bird's Nest Stadium. Very cool. Weirdly enough, you're going to probably see an even cooler stadium in LA for the LA Olympics. I actually don't know much about France in the 2024 Olympics, but LA randomly has a $5 billion Olympic stadium because it got it for the Rams, which people are going to see this weekend for the Rams Bengals, bizarrely Rams Bengals Super Bowl. And we get more fireworks, all very impressive. And I think that's mostly it. And the point of all this is just to enjoy a little bit of the stuff, because now we got to get into all the terrible stuff that's going on that everybody should be expecting. And one thing to really keep in mind is that the Olympics movement, like in general, is just kind of a flagging idea. It isn't really working anymore. It's become totally busted by so many things, by doping scandals, by bribes, by the fact that cities don't even want to bid for these things anymore. And I mean, a great example of this is actually just good old Vladimir Putin, right? So Russia was banned from the Olympics, but the way it works with the Olympics, they're a business, right? They are basically, the Olympics is basically just this, it's a large business, right? It's associated with all these great values and all this stuff, but Russia's really big in the Olympics. You can't really lose Russia. So Russia's currently competing as basically a Russian Olympic Committee or whatever, ROC they're calling it, because they can't get rid of Russia in the Olympics. It would be a worse Olympics. You can't get rid of your big players, otherwise it becomes a worse event, right? If the NBA got rid of the Lakers, the Warriors, whatever, it would be it'd be just an inferior sort of spectacle, right? And unfortunately, that's what they want. They want spectacle. So we're treated to things like Russia still being in the Olympics, even after this massive doping scandal, which everyone's doping, but whatever, they got hit for it, and you can't even do anything about it. Then you have Putin at the Olympics, which I gave a quick picture of, and Putin is there. He's not supposed to be there, right? You're not supposed to be there. You're supposed to be banned from it, but because you're violated it. But there's all these loopholes, so Putin could just come back, and basically she invited him, and it's part of this whole, broader, just geopolitical element to this whole thing. And it's not even that cool. It's not even that interesting. It's not even going to work, right? This whole Putin-Xi thing is nonsense. I think I have a video on it. You should check it out. This Russia-China alliance stuff, just don't buy this. It's a waste of everybody's time. It's mostly even journalists at this point and foreign policy dudes just trying to have something to talk about. But the deeper problem for the Olympics is that cities aren't even bidding on the Olympics anymore. If you go back the last 20 years, go to let's say we have the Athens Olympics earlier in the millennium. You had Rio, you had all these different places. Now you had Beijing, you have Tokyo, you have all these problems. It's getting hard for the Olympics committee to even convince cities to do it. There's such bad outcomes, right? Athens did not prosper. Sydney did not prosper because of all these things. The Olympics doesn't do anything that cities particularly want. It's great for national politics and stuff, but even then, all this stuff is sort of fading. Like, we don't live in a world where you're really worried about, no country is going to get itself on the map anymore because of the Olympics. You're not going to suddenly become a massive economy or have a new role in the global grand political scheme if you're taking the Olympics. All this stuff is just bogus at this point. And even worse, there's basically no, the connection to sports and to like pure athleticism and all this is kind of impaired by the fact there's mad doping everywhere. It's a bad thing, and it's really basically showing in the fact that cities aren't even bidding on the Olympics anymore. The way it worked is like there used to be like 10, like 15, 12, 10, 7, and just kept going down. You had 15 cities trying to get the Olympics a decade ago, and then it was like 7, then it's like 4, and then for 2024 you had 2. You just had 2. You just had LA and Paris, right? And then they were so desperate they basically gave both cities the Olympics, right? It wasn't even a competition anymore. Paris got 2024, LA got 2028, and then for 2032 the Olympics committee just gave it to Brisbane, Australia. And so there's a clear problem here, and it's really interesting because this decline of the Olympics is coinciding with a major decline in the entire globalized world that we know. So people don't remember, go back to the Cold War. The Olympics was fun and all that, but it was hugely politicized. Hugely politicized. The US and Russia, the Cold War, it was just back and forth and bans and all this kind of stuff. It was on and on. I have a video on that in the lead up to this. I talked about it. And it was everywhere. It was everywhere. And you kind of had a bit of a change after the end of the Cold War. And now it's basically back. You know, China really brought politics back into the fray in 2008. And now 2022, it is just here. And it's like rife, right? We have all these countries where the heads of state didn't even show up. You have Xi Jinping, Putin and Xi together. Xi and Putin, we'll just call them Poo. But Xi invites Putin to come, and it's become explicitly political once more. And so things are really changing, and you have the sports element and the athletics element really declining, and you have to really ask, what is the Olympics selling anymore, right? What values is it upholding? Sports, athletics, global anything, prosperity, what exactly is it doing, right? Yes, it's fun to have national competition. That's cool. But this is supposed to be more than national competition because we have national competition in everything, right? It's cool. Like, and the unfortunate part is that only a few countries win, right? It's like, it's really just all the rest of the countries are kind of like in economics, and the rest of the world, they're just left in the lurch, right? 90% of countries barely get on the leaderboards, just like they don't get on the economic leaderboards. And it's not the best thing. And then you get these new problems. You get the US-China problems. You get the whole scandal basically around the Olympics, which we're going to get into right now. And you have to ask, what values is this upholding? What is it actually doing? Obviously, it's a great business if you're the International Olympic Committee. But what if you're, say, not the International Olympic Committee and you're the rest of the world, and you have to watch things like, obviously, we have Putin here, and you also have other things like, I mean, this is pretty heinous. Let me see if I can get this up here. Boom. This is, ooh. It doesn't want to stay. But basically what we're looking at here, right there, that is a Uyghur who brought the flame into, basically lit the Olympic flame, right? And so this is a traditional part of the Olympic ceremony. Someone lights the flame, right? And so China naturally decided to really politicize this and talk about and show how Uyghurs and everyone is united in the grand new unified national integrated harmonious Chinese nation, right? So you had a Uyghur who was basically lighting the Olympic flame. And this is the sort of thing, and even the New York Times recently had an op-ed where the headline was, quote, "In the genocide Olympics, are we all complicit?" End quote, right? So even the New York Times, everyone's basically saying, oh my God, what exactly is going on here? We're allowing China to basically have, I mean, there are Uyghurs in camps, there are Uyghurs getting thrown onto trains, they're monitored. It's so horrific what's going on. Yet we let them just put a Uyghur up on the stage, have the flame there, and just let it happen like this, right? Just basically allow China to do this whole slick spectacle and really have no pushback. It's a pretty horrific thing, right? So people are always saying, oh, China and the US, it's all just politics. And even I'm often saying, there's a lot of strategic stuff going on here. But the US not going to the Olympics really makes a lot more sense when you have a Uyghur who was lighting the flame, because China was explicitly using the Olympics and is explicitly using the Olympics to make this out to be something it's not, right? To make China out to be something it's not. So you also had, unfortunately, my little slideshow is going on its own, so I'll just quickly do it. This is an image of all of the, it was basically China's 50 plus minorities that were all carrying the Chinese flag before it was sort of raised, right? And it was raised by basically military people at the end who started goose stepping the final, final few yards or whatever to the flagpole. But you had the Chinese flag go through all of the minorities who held and cherished the flag in their hands as they passed it to the next minority, who eventually gave it to the Chinese military, who goose stepped the way to the flagpole to raise the flag. That is a really great example of, well, this just kind of farcical thing we have to all watch, right? Okay, the relationship between the historical military of the Chinese state, of all the Chinese states, and the Chinese and the minorities in modern China is really, really far from a harmonious, let's all carry the flag and be united sort of event. But again, that is what we are being forced to watch. And it is this is a dystopian sort of event, right? This is almost North Korea style totalitarian insanity, to be quite honest, right? Things have really changed in China. Part of the reason I'm doing these videos, the reason I didn't go back to China, I'm gonna be able to go back to China in 7 years, is because things have gotten really heinous. And this is what we're seeing, right? We are starting to see less of this world, everything is beautiful because economics is good. So we can just kind of we can let prosperity and development and things happen. We can push it. We can really make progress on making things better for minorities and even the sort of average Chinese person. Now it's very different. Things aren't going that well. So you got to start making everybody say that there's things going well. You have to make everybody believe and act like things are beautiful. And this is where things really get weird. Typically in political states, in Chinese history, and just around the world, when you have to start rejecting reality and imposing a new one that looks a lot prettier than the way that things really are, that is when things get pretty dirty. And I'll be clear, this is not like me giving both sides, but in general, the path of Chinese minorities, the sort of future of every Chinese minority by itself isn't good. But that doesn't mean that the future they have with the Chinese state is anything like what the Chinese state is trying to say it is. So that's just always something to keep in mind. And then we also have, of course, we have Putin again. That wasn't what I was going to say. It wasn't Putin. It was good old Peng Shuai. So this is Peng Shuai. This was the famous Chinese tennis star who, well, had basically disappeared. And this became a whole Me Too inflected event. People should check out the video I had because it really wasn't what anyone was thinking. But part of what happened is that the International Olympic Committee decided to not basically try and sanction China or abandon China, like the international tennis group. The other international tennis group basically said, no, we're not going to have any more events and stuff in China until we know Peng Shuai is okay, and et cetera, things like that happen. The Olympic Committee, again, showing its, what it really values was like, oh no, we'll stick with China. And then you have Peng Shuai appear during the Olympics to both show that she's one with the Chinese state and a patriot for the Chinese people and supporting her nation, and also alive and okay, and showing that all the crazy white people in the United States and elsewhere around the world who don't understand China are just wrong once more. This is kind of what we're seeing, right? And it is, again, it's a really freaky sort of thing. I mean, that's just the only way to say it. It's a dark kind of moment. Like I have a video you should check out about Peng Shuai. This whole scenario isn't what we were led to believe in the West, but nonetheless, she is just yet another prop for the Chinese Communist Party as it tries to fight this constant media narrative battle around the world about just what the Chinese state is. And there's not really a way to win this. What we're really seeing is China just diverging from reality and from the rest of the world so far, so much that it's hard to even see how things kind of get back on track, because things are going very poorly in the material world in China for a lot of reasons that other videos I do and will do get into. But in this narrative world, this world of narrative battles, things are also getting pretty horrible, where, I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, I did them in other videos, but we're having an Olympics that basically China was, it bribed the International Olympic Committee, and it got another Beijing Olympics, and it got a Winter Olympics, even though there's no snow in Beijing. And you have these weird images of basically fake, ski jumps next to old retired steel mills and basically like coal plants, all these things that China actually had shut down to make Beijing more palatable during the 2008 Olympics. But it's just there's so many things that are on display right now in the Olympics that are so bad that everybody really needs to try and watch a little bit of it. It's unfortunate that all the coverage and all this stuff is so kind of unbearable, right? You have it's just so raw in every direction, right? It's just like, here's the heinous Chinese Olympics, which obviously I'm doing a bit of that too. And then here's, wow, look at this amazing spectacle. There's that. And then, oh, here's another, let's just enjoy the sports. But really, we should be looking at this stuff as a sign of how far things have declined, right? When I said in some of these earlier videos that we would look back at the 2022 Olympics, perhaps as a similar event to the 2008, but going down, right? 2008 was China on the rise, and 2022 is China on the decline. And that is pretty clear. We're not seeing it in the material world. Right? We're not seeing poverty everywhere. We're not seeing any of that, but we're really seeing more of China as it is, or as it is becoming, or as it has typically always been under the surface, but briefly was able to sort of break out and change to get the development goals and gains that it needed to basically modernize and make its attempt at being a modern country even feasible. But now things are changing. And the worst part about all this is that we're really seeing the breakdown, like COVID. The Olympics, this breakdown of the Olympics is just another element of this total degradation of this global world that everybody was kind of hoping would happen, right? If you're a vaguely moral person, you probably didn't want violence and chaos and horrific terror all around the world, right? The problem is we had a world that seemed to be on the track to making that happen. Everybody would be great and everything would be beautiful and everybody would be growing and the countries would all be growing and people wouldn't be marginalized and all of that. Problem is we're in a world where it's clear that's not going to happen. And we don't have anymore a global infrastructure that can solve any of these problems. We don't even have the ability to do, not only can we not do COVID as a world, right, and just fix it and band together to handle a global problem together as one, which is also a sign that climate change isn't going to happen that way. We can't even do little baby spectacles that are just supposed to be feel-good sports events either. That ship has also sailed. We can't do the material stuff, and we can't even do a basic perceptual event. We can't even do that. We can't even be happy around that. It all is starting to look weird and saccharine and fake and even like ominous when you're taking into account and just looking at everything going on with these 2022 Winter Olympics, which really, really could be called the Dystopian Games, and it wouldn't be all that far off. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, like it, share it, subscribe, do everything you can do so more people can see it.